The night Ryan Whitmore laughed at his ex-wife in front of everyone was the same night he unknowingly handed her the power to ruin him. The ballroom on the top floor of the Hawthorne Grand Hotel glittered with crystal lights, champagne glasses, and people who measured worth by the price of a watch. Ryan stood near the center of it all in a tailored navy suit, smiling like a man who had already won. Tonight, Whitmore Group was supposed to secure the largest partnership in its history, a deal that would push his company into every major market from New York to Los Angeles. Reporters waited near the entrance. Investors circled him with practiced smiles. And beside him, Sophia Lane rested one hand on his arm as if she had always belonged there. Then the elevator doors opened. Emily Carter stepped out alone. She wore a simple black dress, modest pearl earrings, and carried a small leather folder against her chest. Her skin was pale under the warm lights. Her face calm, almost too calm for a woman walking into a room full of people who remembered her only as Ryan Whitmore's discarded wife. Sophia noticed her first. A slow smile curved across her lips. "Ryan," she whispered, loud enough for the closest guests to hear. "Is she here to ask for help?" Ryan turned, and for one brief second, surprise crossed his face. Then pride replaced it. He lifted his glass and chuckled. "Emily," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "This is a private business event, not a place for old memories." A few people laughed softly. Emily did not answer. Ryan stepped closer, enjoying the silence he had created. "I hope you understand," he continued. "Some rooms require a certain level of success to enter." Sophia covered her mouth like she was hiding a laugh. Margaret Whitmore, Ryan's mother, looked Emily up and down with cold disappointment. "Some women never learn when to move on," she said. Emily's fingers tightened around the leather folder, but her expression did not break. Ryan lowered his voice just enough to sound cruel while still being heard. "You were my wife once, Emily. Don't confuse that with having value." The room went still. For the first time, Emily looked directly into his eyes. She did not cry. She did not defend herself. She only asked, "Are you sure you want to say that here?" Ryan smiled and snapped his fingers toward security. "Escort her out." But before the guards could move, Olivia Grant, the woman every investor in the room had been waiting for, hurried across the marble floor and said, "Mr. Whitmore, you just ordered security to remove the woman who controls your contract." Ryan's smile disappeared so quickly that Emily almost wondered if he had ever truly been smiling at all. Olivia Grant stood between him and the security guards with the kind of calm authority that did not need to raise its voice. Around them, the ballroom shifted from laughter to confusion. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to lips. Investors who had been praising Ryan 5 minutes earlier now looked at Emily, as if they were seeing a stranger step out of a shadow and into a spotlight. Ryan gave a short, uncertain laugh. "Olivia, there must be some misunderstanding." Olivia did not smile back. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Whitmore. Miss Carter is not an uninvited guest. She is the principal decision-maker for Carter and Vale Holdings." Sophia's hand slipped slowly from Ryan's arm. Margaret Whitmore blinked as though the name had reached her ears in another language. Ryan looked at Emily, then at the folder in her hands, then back to Olivia. "That is impossible," he said. The word came out softer than he intended. Emily said nothing. She let the silence stretch, because for 3 years, Ryan had filled every room with his version of her story. Now, for the first time, he had to stand inside a room where no one was rushing to believe him. But before Emily Carter became the woman standing in that ballroom with the future of Whitmore Group in her hands, she had been the woman sitting at a second-hand kitchen table at 2 in the morning, building that company before Ryan even knew how to spell investor confidence. Back then, they lived in a small apartment outside Chicago with thin walls, uneven heat, and a refrigerator that made a rattling sound every time the motor kicked on. Ryan had big dreams and no patience. Emily had quiet discipline and a mind that could turn chaos into structure. He called himself a founder before he had a real business plan. She was the one who made the numbers work. She wrote the first proposal for Whitmore Group while Ryan practiced his pitch in front of the bathroom mirror. She stayed awake after double shifts, editing his emails to potential investors, building spreadsheets, comparing market data, and trimming every wild promise into something that looked believable. When Ryan got nervous before his first meeting, Emily ironed his shirt, packed his notes, and told him exactly which points to emphasize. When the first investor said yes, Ryan came home shouting with joy, lifted her off the floor, and said, "We did it." For a while, Emily believed he meant both of them. In the early days, Ryan used to introduce her as his secret weapon. At small networking events, he would place a hand on her back and say, "She sees things I miss." Emily never needed the spotlight. She only wanted partnership. She wanted to build a life with someone who remembered who stood beside him when the lights were not yet bright. But success changed the temperature of their marriage 1 degree at a time, so slowly that she did not realize she was freezing until she could no longer feel warmth in his voice. The apartment became a townhouse. The townhouse became a glass-walled home in a gated community 20 miles from downtown. Ryan's suits became more expensive. His circle became richer. His laugh changed first, then his schedule, then the way he looked at her when she walked into a room. At business dinners, he stopped saying she helped him build the company. He began saying she was supportive at home. When investors praised the financial models, Ryan nodded as if he had created them alone. When Emily corrected a mistake in a contract draft, he frowned and told her not to embarrass him in front of people. The first time he said, "You do not understand how these rooms work." Emily thought he was tired. The second time, she thought he was stressed. By the 10th time, she understood that he was not forgetting her value. He was erasing it. Sophia Lane entered their world at a charity auction downtown. She was polished, confident, and fluent in the language of wealthy people who never seemed to touch ordinary problems. She laughed at Ryan's jokes, praised his instincts, and called him a visionary in front of the exact people he wanted to impress. Emily noticed how Ryan straightened when Sophia spoke to him. She noticed how he stopped checking whether Emily had entered the room. She noticed how Margaret Whitmore, who had never truly accepted her, suddenly treated Sophia like the kind of woman Ryan should have married in the first place. Margaret had always believed Emily was too plain, too quiet, too middle-class for the Whitmore name. A man's wife should elevate his image, Margaret once said over Sunday dinner, slicing into her salad without looking up. Not remind people where he started. Emily sat across from her, white hands folded in her lap, and waited for Ryan to defend her. He did not. He only took a sip of water and changed the subject to quarterly revenue. That was the night Emily stopped expecting rescue. After that, the small humiliations became routine. Ryan corrected her in public even when she was right. He brushed off her advice, then used the same advice days later as if it had come from him. At company gatherings, Sophia hovered nearby with compliments sharp enough to cut. "Emily, it must be nice not having to worry about business pressure," she once said. "Some people are built for boardrooms. Some are built for comfort." Emily smiled politely, but inside, something quiet began keeping score. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. She started saving copies of old proposals, drafts, market reports, and financial notes she had created. She backed up emails Ryan had ignored. She kept records of warnings she had given him about vendor dependency, inflated projections, risky debt, and contracts written too loosely for a company growing that fast. Ryan called her cautious. Emily called it math. Then came the evening he placed the divorce papers on the kitchen island between them, as if he were presenting a business document. Their home was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the rain tapping against the windows. Ryan stood in his charcoal suit, not sitting down, not softening his expression, not pretending this was hard for him. "This is better for both of us," he said. Emily looked at the papers, then at the man she had once believed would grow old beside her. "Both of us?" she asked. Ryan sighed, irritated by the question. "Emily, we have become different people." She almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was such a clean sentence for such a dirty truth. He had become powerful and wanted a wife who looked like a trophy. She had become inconvenient because she remembered the version of him who needed help. "Is there someone else?" she asked. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Do not make this dramatic." That answer told her enough. He slid a settlement offer toward her. It was not generous. It was not even fair. It was designed to make her disappear quietly. "You will be comfortable," he said, "and you can start over." Emily looked at the number and understood how little he thought her silence was worth. Margaret called the next morning before Emily had packed a single box. "The dignified thing would be not to fight this," she said. "Ryan has important years ahead of him." Emily listened without interrupting. When Margaret finished, Emily answered, "I hope he is ready for them." Then she hung up. On the day she left the house, Ryan was not there. He had a meeting. Or perhaps he simply did not want to witness the end of the life he had already replaced. Emily packed her clothes, a few framed photographs, her grandmother's pearl earrings, and one old silver laptop from the bottom drawer of the home office. The laptop was scratched at the corners and slow to start, but it held the earliest bones of Whitmore Group. The original business plan, the first investor deck, the cost models, the supplier research, the contracts she had marked up, and a folder Ryan had never bothered to open because the title sounded too cautious for his taste. Operational risks, future exposure, and failure points. Emily had created it 18 months before the divorce, after noticing patterns Ryan was too proud to examine. Whitmore Group was growing, but its growth stood on weak beams. Too much debt was tied to short-term projections. Too many deals depended on vendors with overlapping ownership. Too many public claims were more confident than the documents behind them. Emily had warned Ryan. He had told her she worried like someone who expected failure. Now, as she sat alone in a modest apartment on the other side of town, the old laptop glowing on a cardboard box because she had not bought a desk yet, Emily opened that folder again. Rain streaked the window. Her bank account was smaller than Ryan probably assumed. Her name was no longer on invitations. People who had once smiled at her no longer called. And for the first time in years, no one was standing over her shoulder telling her to be quiet. She read every file until sunrise. She saw not only what Ryan had built, but what he had ignored. She saw the gaps, the dependencies, the pressure points. She saw the parts of the market Whitmore Group needed, but did not control. And somewhere between 3 in the morning and the first gray light over the city, Emily stopped thinking like a discarded wife and started thinking like a founder. The next week, she met Daniel Brooks in a small legal office above a coffee shop. He was a careful man with silver-framed glasses, a calm voice, and the rare habit of reading every page before offering an opinion. Emily expected him to treat her like a woman seeking revenge. Instead, after 2 hours of reviewing her documents, he leaned back and said, "Miss Carter, this is not a divorce story. This is a business map." Emily looked down at the folder in front of her. "Can it become something real?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "With discipline, patience, and the right structure, yes." So Emily chose discipline. While Ryan appeared in business magazines with Sophia at his side and spoke about vision, Emily built quietly. She took consulting work under her maiden name. She rented a small office with one window and no receptionist. She studied logistics, commercial real estate, regional suppliers, and distressed assets that larger firms ignored because they were not glamorous enough. She did not chase headlines. She chased leverage. Every small step was deliberate. Every meeting had a purpose. Every dollar had a job. Months passed. Then a year. Ryan never looked for her because he believed there was nothing to find. That was his first mistake. His second was assuming the woman he had erased would stay erased. Back in the ballroom, Ryan was still staring at Olivia Grant, as if the facts might rearrange themselves if he waited long enough. Emily opened the leather folder and removed one clean page. At the top was the Carter and Vale Holdings letterhead. Beneath it was the final approval sheet for the partnership Ryan had spent the entire night celebrating. His signature was already there. His board had already agreed. His investors had already been told the deal was nearly complete. Only one line remained blank. Emily placed the page on the table beside him, rested her hand lightly on the empty signature line, and said, "You were right about one thing, Ryan. Some rooms do require a certain level of success to enter." Then she looked around the glittering ballroom, at the guests who had laughed, at Sophia's fading smile, at Margaret's stunned face, and finally back at the man who once told her she would be nothing without him. "Tonight," Emily said, "you are standing in mine." For 3 full seconds, no one in the ballroom moved. Ryan stared at the approval sheet as though the paper itself had betrayed him. The same investors who had laughed at Emily moments earlier now studied her with the careful attention people reserve for someone who can change the value of their future with one signature. Sophia's smile had vanished completely. Margaret Whitmore held her chin high, but the color had drained from her face. Emily did not enjoy their discomfort. That was what surprised her most. For years, she had imagined the moment Ryan would finally understand what he had thrown away. She had pictured it during lonely nights in her apartment, during early morning coffee runs before meetings, during long drives across Illinois to visit warehouses, supplier offices, and properties no one glamorous wanted to touch. She thought it would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like standing at the end of a long road and realizing she had outgrown the person waiting there. Ryan forced a laugh, but it sounded thin. This is impressive, Emily. Really. But let us not turn a business evening into a personal performance. Emily looked at him calmly. I agree. That is why I brought documents instead of memories. Olivia Grant stepped beside her and placed a second file on the table. The boardroom is ready. Ryan's eyes moved toward the closed double doors beyond the ballroom. Now, Olivia answered, the investors were told tonight would include final terms. They are waiting. That was when Ryan understood the trap was not emotional. It was professional. Emily had not come to embarrass him with tears, accusations, or old pain. She had come prepared. The kind of prepared he used to rely on before he learned to resent it. As they walked toward the boardroom, every step pulled Emily back through the years Ryan had never bothered to imagine. After the divorce, he had gone on with his public life as if nothing meaningful had ended. He appeared in magazine interviews, bought a new penthouse near downtown Chicago, and let Sophia host sleek dinner parties where people praised his discipline. Emily saw the photos online only once. Ryan in a black tuxedo, Sophia in a white designer gown, Margaret smiling beside them like a woman whose family had finally been restored to the image she preferred. Under the photo, the caption read, Ryan Whitmore celebrates a new chapter. Emily closed the browser and never searched his name again. Her own new chapter did not look beautiful. It looked like a 400-square-foot apartment with a kitchen light that flickered when the heat came on. It looked like grocery lists written on envelopes and shoes worn down from walking between bus stops because she sold her car to create cash flow. It looked like answering consulting emails until midnight, then waking at 5 in the morning to study acquisition reports before the city turned bright. No one applauded that kind of beginning. No one photographed it. But Daniel Brooks respected it. In the second month after their first meeting, he handed Emily a stack of incorporation papers and said, if you want this to be real, give it a name that can stand on a building one day. Emily looked at the blank line where the company name should go. Carter was hers, the name Ryan had treated like something temporary. Vale came from the street where her grandmother had lived, the small white house in Indiana where Emily learned that quiet women could carry entire families without asking to be seen. She wrote the names slowly, Carter and Vale Holdings. Daniel nodded. Then we build it correctly. Correctly meant slowly. Correctly meant no shortcuts, no emotional spending, no reckless move designed just to make Ryan notice. Emily took small consulting contracts for companies that could not afford the large firms Ryan liked to impress. She helped a family-owned transportation company reduce fuel waste by rerouting delivery schedules across 3 counties. She helped a struggling property manager restructure leases for a half-empty office park outside Naperville. She helped a regional food distributor identify why its costs kept rising even when sales looked healthy. The fees were modest. The lessons were priceless. Emily did not only earn money. She learned where power actually lived. Not in speeches. Not in luxury hotel ballrooms. Not in the people standing closest to cameras. Power lived in supply chains, debt terms, lease renewals, vendor dependencies, and the quiet agreements that kept companies breathing. Ryan loved the front door of business. Emily studied the foundation. Her first major opportunity came through a warehouse Ryan had once rejected. It sat 12 miles outside Joliet, with cracked pavement, faded signage, and a roof that needed work. A broker told Emily the property was too dull for serious investors. Emily spent 2 weekends reviewing traffic routes, rail access, trucking patterns, and regional demand. Then she called Daniel. It is ugly, she said. But it is useful. Daniel asked, useful to whom? Emily looked at the maps spread across her apartment floor. To companies that need Chicago access without Chicago prices. Carter and Vale bought the warehouse through a cautious financing structure that made Daniel nervous and proud at the same time. Emily spent 6 months improving the property, negotiating with contractors, and leasing sections to small logistics firms. She did not choose tenants because they looked impressive. She chose tenants because their businesses solved real problems. By the end of the year, the ugly warehouse was profitable. More importantly, it became a node. A small one, but one that connected to other companies, other needs, other pressure points. Olivia Grant noticed Emily because of that warehouse. At the time, Olivia was not yet publicly attached to Carter and Vale. She was a respected executive with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation for walking away from deals that smelled even slightly dishonest. She visited the Joliet property on a cold November morning wearing a camel coat and practical boots, not the kind of woman who needed a room to worship her. Emily met her outside with coffee in a paper cup. "I expected someone older," Olivia said. Emily answered, "I expected someone less direct." Olivia almost smiled. For 2 hours, Emily walked her through the property, the tenants, the margins, and the regional problem she believed Carter and Vale could solve. She did not exaggerate. She admitted risks. She explained the debt structure, the repairs still needed, and the tenants most likely to expand within 18 months. Olivia listened without interruption. At the end, she asked, "Why did everyone else miss this?" Emily looked across. The loading docks, where trucks moved in and out with steady rhythm. Because it did not look rich. It only looked necessary. That was the sentence Olivia remembered. 3 weeks later, she invited Emily to lunch at a quiet restaurant near the river. No champagne, no crowd, just 2 women, 1 table, and a serious conversation. Olivia had reviewed Emily's work, Daniel's legal structures, and the early Carter and Vale balance sheets. "You are not building like someone trying to prove a point," Olivia said. "You are building like someone who knows exactly where the market is careless." Emily held her water glass with both hands. "Careless people leave openings." "Including your ex-husband?" Emily paused. She had not told Olivia much about Ryan, but good executives rarely needed every detail to understand the shape of a story. "Especially him," Emily said. Olivia leaned back. "Then be careful. A comeback built on anger burns fast. A company built on discipline lasts." Emily took that warning seriously. Every time emotion tempted her to move too quickly, she waited. When she learned that one of Ryan's vendors was quietly seeking new capital, she did not rush in with her name attached. She used a separate entity Daniel had prepared. When a small packaging company tied to Whitmore Group's supply chain struggled after losing 2 clients, Carter and Vale offered financing in exchange for a minority stake and operational oversight. When a commercial property near a planned distribution corridor became available, Emily negotiated through an agent who never mentioned her past. Piece by piece, she was not attacking Ryan. She was surrounding the market he depended on. The irony was almost painful. Ryan had spent years telling people Emily did not understand business. Yet his company's largest future deal increasingly depended on assets she controlled, vendors she had stabilized, and regional access she had quietly organized. He did not notice because he never looked down. He only looked forward, toward applause. During those years, Emily changed too. Not loudly. Not suddenly. She learned to speak in rooms where men interrupted and then stopped interrupting. She learned to read silence across conference tables. She learned when to reveal information and when to let someone else expose their ignorance. She bought better clothes only when the company could afford it. She moved from the flickering apartment into a modest townhouse not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she wanted a home office with a real door. On the day Carter and Vale closed its 3rd major acquisition, Daniel brought a small cake to the office. It was from a grocery store bakery, vanilla with blue icing, and the words were slightly crooked. "Congratulations, boss." Emily laughed for the first time in weeks. "Boss," Daniel said, "you should get used to it." She looked around the office then. 8 employees, 2 conference rooms, a wall of maps, a growing list of assets. No crystal chandeliers, no reporters, no Ryan. But there was something stronger than glamour in that room. There was ownership. Still, Emily never intended to appear in Ryan's world again until Whitmore Group came looking for Carter and Vale. The request arrived through formal channels. Ryan's board wanted access to a logistics and property network that could support a national expansion. The proposal was ambitious, polished, and dangerously overconfident. Emily recognized Ryan's fingerprints immediately. Big claims, clean language, weak support beneath the shine. Olivia read the proposal and raised one eyebrow. "Does he know?" "No," Daniel said. The approach came through their strategy team. They believe Carter and Vale is controlled by private investors. Olivia turned to Emily. "And what do you want?" Emily studied the proposal for a long time. Part of her wanted to reject it immediately. Part of her wanted to send it back and signed with a single note. You should have read the room better. But that would have been emotion. And Emily had not built Carter and Vale by letting emotion drive. I want a full review, she said. If the deal is sound, we consider it. If it is not, we protect ourselves. Daniel glanced at her. And Ryan. Emily closed the file. Ryan is no longer the center of the decision. That was true. But fate, business, and Ryan's own arrogance pulled him back into her path anyway. As Carter and Vale's review deepened, Emily discovered that Whitmore Group was more fragile than the public believed. Revenue was strong, but cash flow was strained. Expansion depended on assumptions that left little room for delays. Certain vendor agreements had been presented to investors as stable when they were already under pressure. None of it was dramatic enough to destroy a company overnight, but it was enough to make a major partnership dangerous. Emily documented everything. Not to shame him, to protect what she had built. Then came Ryan's invitation to the Hawthorne Grand Hotel, not personally to Emily, but to Carter and Vale's executive office. He wanted a public celebration before final approval. Olivia called it reckless. Daniel called it premature. Emily called it familiar. Ryan had always loved applause before the work was finished. She agreed to attend, but did not announce her role in advance. Olivia asked why. Emily looked at the invitation, at Ryan's bold signature across the bottom, and thought of every room where he had reduced her to a footnote. Because I want to see whether he has changed, she said. Olivia's expression softened. And if he has not? Emily placed the invitation in her folder. Then he will reveal that himself. Now, standing outside the boardroom at the Hawthorne Grand, Emily heard the murmurs behind her. Ryan was trying to recover with investors. Sophia was whispering quickly to someone near the bar. Margaret was pretending this was beneath her while watching every move Emily made. Olivia opened the boardroom doors. Inside, a long table waited beneath soft white lights. At each seat sat a printed packet with Carter and Vale's seal on the cover. Ryan stepped in after Emily, his jaw tight, his confidence patched together but not repaired. Emily, he said quietly, whatever point you are trying to make, we can discuss this privately. She turned to him before taking her seat at the head of the table. That is the difference between us, Ryan. You humiliated me in public. I am evaluating you in business. Then she sat down. One by one, the investors followed. Olivia took the seat to Emily's right. Daniel Brooks entered last, placed a thick folder in front of her, and gave Ryan a polite nod that made him look even more uncomfortable. Ryan stared at Daniel, then at the documents, then at Emily's name printed on the agenda. Emily Carter, founder and chief executive officer. For the first time all night, he seemed to understand that this was not a surprise appearance. It was a meeting she controlled from beginning to end. Emily opened the packet to the first page, looked across the table at the man who once believed she would vanish without his name, and said, "Let us begin with the numbers you hoped no one would question." The sentence landed harder than any insult Ryan had thrown that night, because Emily did not sound angry. She sounded ready. Ryan looked around the boardroom, searching for the familiar comfort of people who usually leaned toward him, smiled for him, and waited for him to speak first. But the room had changed. The investors were not watching Ryan anymore. They were watching Emily. She sat at the head of the table with the leather folder open in front of her, her posture straight, her voice even, her pale hands resting beside a stack of marked documents that looked far too organized to be improvised. Olivia Grant sat to her right with a calm expression. Daniel Brooks sat to her left, a pen in his hand, and the patient silence of a man who already knew where every page would lead. Ryan forced himself into the chair across from Emily. Sophia slipped into a seat near the wall, no longer acting like the queen of the evening. Margaret remained standing for a moment, as if sitting would mean accepting that Emily had authority in the room. Then Olivia looked at her and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, this meeting is for participating stakeholders only." Margaret's face tightened. For years, she had dismissed Emily with small comments and polished cruelty. Now she was being dismissed by the same woman without a single rude word. "I am Ryan's mother," Margaret said. Emily turned one page in the packet. "Then you may support him from outside the room." No one laughed. That made it worse for Margaret. She walked out stiffly, and the door closed behind her with a soft click that felt final. Ryan leaned forward. "Emily, before this becomes unnecessarily hostile, I think everyone here should remember that Whitmore Group has always negotiated in good faith. Emily looked at the first page of the review. Then good faith should survive basic questions. She nodded to Daniel. He passed copies of a financial summary down the table. The investors began reading, and Ryan felt the air tighten before anyone said a word. The first chart showed projected expansion costs across 12 major markets. The second compared those projections with actual vendor capacity. The third showed delayed payments and short-term obligations that Ryan's public presentation had softened into language so smooth it almost hid the danger. Almost. Emily did not attack him. She did not mention the divorce. She did not remind the room that he had called her worthless less than an hour ago. She simply walked everyone through the numbers. Your growth forecast assumes a 16% reduction in regional distribution costs within 8 months, she said. But 3 of the vendors listed in your support documents are already operating near capacity. One has recently requested emergency financing. Another depends on warehouse access that Carter and Vail now controls. The third has a renewal clause due in 90 days, and your team did not include that risk in the final packet. Ryan's jaw hardened. Those are manageable variables. Emily nodded once. Then you should have managed them before asking another company to carry your expansion. One investor, a gray-haired man named Patrick Hayes, adjusted his glasses. Mr. Whitmore, were these vendor issues disclosed to your board? Ryan looked at him quickly. They were not material enough to change the strategic outlook. Emily slid another page forward. They become material when your entire national launch depends on them. Patrick looked back at the page. Another investor whispered to his associate. Sophia stared at Ryan as though she had never seen him lose control of a conversation before. Ryan hated that most of all. He could tolerate Emily's success if the room still admired him. But admiration was leaving him by inches. He tried to recover the only way he knew how, by turning the room back into a stage. Let us be honest, he said, giving a tight smile. Emily knows my company well, because she was once close to it. I respect that. But proximity is not the same as executive experience. The words were polished, but everyone heard the old insult underneath. Emily let the silence sit for one beat, then another. You are right, she said. Proximity is not executive experience. That is why this review was not based on memory. It was based on contracts, filings, vendor interviews, payment records, capacity reports, and your own submitted documents. Daniel opened the thick folder beside him. Every figure cited in Miss Carter's review is sourced. We can provide supporting documentation for each item. Ryan's smile thinned. Daniel, is it? I assume you are being paid well to make this sound dramatic. Daniel looked up. I am being paid to make sure no one at this table mistakes confidence for evidence. Olivia's mouth barely moved, but Emily saw the hint of approval. Ryan saw it too, and something inside him began to crack. He had walked into the Hawthorne Grand Hotel expecting a celebration. He had expected photographs, applause, headlines, and Sophia's proud hand on his arm. He had expected the contract to be a formality, the final signature to arrive because he believed important rooms were designed to reward men like him. He had not expected the woman he had dismissed to know the weak joints inside his empire. He had not expected her to control the very ground beneath his expansion. Emily turned to the next section. There is also the issue of valuation. Ryan stiffened. Our valuation was reviewed by a reputable firm. Using assumptions provided by your internal team, Emily said. When adjusted for supplier instability, debt exposure, and dependency on assets outside your control, the valuation changes significantly. She placed a revised figure on the screen at the front of the room. The number was lower than Ryan expected. Much lower. A quiet reaction moved through the investors. Not shock exactly. Recognition. The kind that comes when people realize a beautiful building has foundation problems. Ryan stared at the screen. That number is insulting. Emily looked at him steadily. No. What you said to me in the ballroom was insulting. This number is conservative. Sophia inhaled sharply. Patrick Hayes lowered his eyes to hide his reaction. Ryan's face flushed, but he kept his voice controlled. You are enjoying this. Emily did not answer immediately. When she spoke, her voice was softer, which made the room listen even harder. I thought I might. For a long time, I wondered what it would feel like if you finally had to hear me in a room you could not push me out of. Ryan held her gaze. For 1 second, Something like recognition passed through his expression. Not regret. Not yet. Just the first uncomfortable glimpse of truth. Emily continued, but this is not about enjoyment. It is about responsibility. Carter and Vale will not sign a partnership that exposes our employees, our assets, or our investors to risks your team chose to minimize. Olivia added, we have two options on the table. We can walk away completely, or we can discuss a limited acquisition of the operational assets that still have long-term value. Ryan turned to Olivia, stunned. Acquisition. Emily turned another page. The logistics division, selected regional contracts, and 2 commercial property agreements. We are not interested in Whitmore Group as a whole. The insult was quiet, precise, and devastating. Ryan had built his identity around the idea that Whitmore Group was an empire. Emily had just separated the useful pieces from the ego. You cannot carve up my company, he said. Not without my consent. Correct, Emily said. But your creditors, investors, and board may have different priorities if the partnership fails tonight. The room shifted again. Ryan looked toward Patrick, but Patrick was reading the acquisition summary with the expression of a man already calculating damage control. Sophia stood suddenly. Ryan, can we speak outside? Her voice was sharp with panic, not loyalty. Emily noticed the difference. So did Ryan. He ignored her. Emily, he said, and for the first time that night, her name sounded less like a weapon and more like a plea he was trying to disguise. You are letting old feelings affect a major decision. Emily closed the folder halfway. Old feelings would have made me destroy this deal without reviewing it. Discipline made me examine it first. Daniel placed one final document in front of her. Emily did not open it yet. Ryan's eyes dropped to the page, then back to her face. What is that? She rested one hand on the cover. The reason I agreed to meet tonight. The room became completely silent. Ryan tried to read her expression, but the woman in front of him was no longer the wife who waited for him to defend her at dinner, no longer the woman who signed divorce papers while rain tapped against the kitchen windows, no longer the woman he believed would fade into the background of his success. Emily Carter had entered the room with facts, leverage, and a choice. But the last document was different. It was not only about contracts or valuation. It was about the one truth Ryan had never wanted anyone to see. Emily opened it slowly, turned it toward him, and said, before this room decides your future, they deserve to know who actually built the beginning of it. Ryan did not reach for the document. For the first time that night, he seemed afraid of paper. Emily watched his face carefully, not because she wanted to see him suffer, but because she wanted to know whether there was still any part of him capable of recognizing the truth without trying to bury it. The room waited. Patrick Hayes leaned forward. Olivia Grant folded her hands on the table. Daniel Brooks kept his pen still, because even he understood that this moment was no longer just about business risk. It was about authorship. It was about a life Ryan had rewritten until the woman who helped build his beginning became a footnote in his success story. Emily turned the first page toward the investors. This is the original founding proposal for Whitmore Group, she said. The version that secured the company's first outside meeting 11 years ago. Ryan's mouth tightened. Ancient history. Emily looked at him. History is only ancient when it does not threaten the version you prefer. She slid copies down the table. On each page, there were notes, charts, early market research, and the first rough outline of what Whitmore Group had eventually become. At the bottom of the document, beneath the financial model, was a name Ryan had never mentioned in interviews, speeches, or investor letters. Emily Carter. Patrick read the page slowly. You created this model? Emily nodded. I created the model, wrote the first investor deck, identified the initial client segment, and revised the pitch that brought in the company's first seed funding. Ryan gave a sharp exhale. She helped. That is all. Lots of spouses help in the beginning. Emily did not flinch. Helping is reminding someone to bring an umbrella. Building a financial structure, writing the market strategy, and correcting investor projections is work. The sentence was calm, but it cut cleanly through the room. Sophia, still standing near the wall, looked from Ryan to Emily with a new expression, not sympathy, not yet, but calculation. She had admired Ryan because he seemed self-made. Now she was seeing the missing scaffolding behind the man she had chosen to praise. Ryan leaned back, trying to regain his posture of control. Even if that is true, It has nothing to do with tonight's decision. Emily turned another page. It has everything to do with judgment. A founder who erases contributors will also ignore warnings. A chief executive officer who confuses admiration with accuracy will eventually treat risk like disloyalty. She paused, letting the words settle. That pattern is why we are here. Daniel passed out the next set of documents. These were dated years later, during the period when Whitmore Group began expanding beyond its original region. Emily had marked vendor concentration risks, cash flow pressure points, and contract clauses that could become dangerous if the company tried to scale too quickly. Each warning had been sent to Ryan. Each warning had been dismissed, not because it lacked evidence, but because it came from a wife he had already started treating like background noise. Patrick looked up. Mr. Whitmore, did your executive team review these warnings? Ryan stared at the pages. These were informal notes. They were not official reports. Emily replied. They were informal because you refused to let them become official. Olivia looked at Ryan then, and her voice was quiet but firm. That matters. Ryan's hand curled slightly against the table. He was not a man used to being cornered by facts. In his world, confidence usually arrived first and details followed behind, cleaned up by people whose names never appeared on stage. But Emily had brought the details with dates, emails, attachments, and records. She had not come with a speech. She had come with proof. Ryan turned to the investors. This is personal. Can no one else see that? She is using old marriage problems to influence a corporate decision. Emily closed one folder and opened another. Then let us remove the marriage from the conversation. Her voice did not rise. If I had never been your wife, Carter and Vale would still decline the full partnership based on vendor instability, debt exposure, inflated capacity assumptions, and incomplete disclosure. If I had never known you personally, we would still question whether Whitmore Group's leadership can respond to risk before it becomes damage. The marriage only explains why you underestimated the person telling you the truth. The room went still again. This time, the silence did not belong to shock. It belonged to understanding. Ryan looked across the table at Emily, and for a moment, the ballroom, the investors, the champagne, and Sophia all seemed to fall away from him. He saw the young woman in their old apartment, sitting at the kitchen table in a faded sweatshirt, pushing a calculator aside so she could rewrite his pitch. He saw her holding coffee with both hands during winter mornings when the heat barely worked. He saw her asking questions he was too impatient to answer. He saw her, waiting for him to say thank you and receiving strategy instead. But the memory did not soften him. Pride moved faster. You could have said something back then, he said. Emily's eyes did not leave his. I did. Many times. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. Sophia looked down. Patrick made a note. Daniel finally clicked his pen. The small sound felt like a period at the end of Ryan's defense. Emily turned to the screen at the front of the boardroom. A new slide appeared. It showed two paths. The first was labeled Full Strategic Partnership. The second was labeled Limited Asset Acquisition and Employee Protection Plan. The first path was marked in red. The second in blue. Carter and Vale will not proceed with the full partnership, Emily said. We will not attach our company to projections we cannot trust. However, we are prepared to offer a limited acquisition of the logistics division, selected regional contracts, and certain commercial property agreements under revised valuation terms. Ryan stared at the blue column. You are offering to buy the strongest part of my company. I am offering to preserve the part that still works, Emily said. There is a difference. Patrick Hayes looked at the numbers again. And the employees? Emily answered immediately. Protected through transition packages, retention bonuses for essential staff, and continued operations at current facilities for a minimum of 12 months, subject to performance review. One of the other investors, a woman named Karen Bell, looked up with visible interest. You already prepared retention terms? Emily nodded. The workers did not create this situation. They should not be punished for leadership's pride. That sentence changed the room more than any insult could have. Until then, some investors had watched Emily as a former wife with leverage. Now they saw the chief executive officer in full. Not the woman Ryan abandoned. Not the woman Sophia mocked. Not the woman Margaret wanted removed from the family image. A leader. A builder. Someone who understood that power meant responsibility, not spectacle. Ryan felt the shift and hated it. You walk in here after years away and expect my board to hand you pieces of my company? Emily looked at him with the same calm that had unsettled him all night. No, Ryan. I expect your board to choose the option that protects value. Patrick removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mr. Whitmore, we need to consider this seriously. Ryan turned toward him. Patrick, do not tell me you are entertaining this. Patrick did not look away. I am telling you we have a fiduciary obligation to evaluate the least damaging path. The phrase struck Ryan like a door closing. Fiduciary obligation. Not loyalty. Not friendship. Not admiration. The language of people who were no longer clapping for him. Sophia moved closer to Ryan and whispered, You said this deal was guaranteed. Ryan snapped his eyes toward her. Not now. But Sophia was no longer whispering for his sake. She was measuring the distance between herself and a sinking reputation. You told everyone Carter and Vale needed you, she said. Emily heard it, but she did not react. That was not her humiliation to manage. It was Ryan's. Margaret, unable to stay away, opened the boardroom door without knocking. Her face was tight with controlled panic. Ryan, the reporters are asking why the signing has been delayed. Olivia stood. This is a closed meeting. Margaret ignored her and looked directly at Emily. You have made your point. Emily turned her head slowly. The room seemed to hold its breath. Margaret had spent years speaking to Emily as if politeness were a favor granted by social rank. Now her voice carried a tremor beneath the elegance. Whatever happened between you and my son, Margaret continued, there is no need to embarrass the family. Emily rose from her chair, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to remind everyone whose table this had become. Mrs. Whitmore, your family embarrassed me when I was useful and invisible. Tonight, I am visible, and suddenly you are concerned about dignity. Margaret's lips parted, but no answer came. Emily did not continue. She did not need to. Olivia stepped to the door and opened it wider. Margaret looked at Ryan for rescue. Ryan looked away. That small betrayal was not loud, but Emily saw it, and she remembered every dinner table where he had done the same to her. Margaret left. This time, the door closed with more force. Ryan's face had gone pale beneath the warm boardroom lights. He looked at Emily as if she had become someone he could not categorize. He had prepared for anger. He had prepared for tears. He had prepared, perhaps, for the pleasure of dismissing her. One more time. He had not prepared for her to be fair. Fairness gave him no easy villain to fight. Emily gathered the documents into a neat stack. The offer remains open for 48 hours, she said. After that, Carter and Vale withdraws completely. Karen Bell looked toward Patrick. Patrick gave a slow nod. We will need an emergency board session. Ryan pushed back his chair. I am still chief executive officer. Patrick's expression did not change. For now, those two words stripped the last performance from the room. Ryan stood frozen, surrounded by people who had built their trust around his confidence, and were now watching that confidence fail under examination. Emily slid the final packet across the table to Patrick, not Ryan. It was a small gesture, but everyone understood it. The future of Whitmore Group was no longer a conversation Ryan controlled. Ryan looked at the packet, then at Emily. His voice dropped low enough that only those nearest could hear. Was this what you wanted? To take everything from me? Emily picked up her leather folder, the same one he had mocked when she entered the ballroom. No, she said. If I wanted to take everything, I would have let your expansion collapse after signing. I came here to stop your mistakes from becoming everyone else's disaster. Ryan searched her face, perhaps looking for hatred, because hatred would have made sense to him. It would have allowed him to say she was bitter, emotional, unstable, anything except right. But Emily gave him none of that. She gave him only the truth. You thought I wanted revenge, she said. I wanted ownership. Olivia opened the boardroom door. Beyond it, the ballroom was still bright, but the celebration had curdled into whispers. Reporters stood near the far wall. Investors checked their phones. Sophia walked out first, not waiting for Ryan. Patrick and Karen followed, speaking quietly about board procedure. Daniel stayed beside Emily. Ryan remained at the table for a moment longer, staring at the empty signature line on the contract that would not be signed. 30 minutes ago, he had ordered security to remove his ex-wife. Now his company's survival depended on whether her offer was accepted. Emily stepped into the hallway, and the murmurs shifted toward her. Not mocking this time. Watching. Measuring. Respecting. Ryan followed a few seconds later, his polished image cracked in places. No tailor could repair. Sophia met him near the entrance with a tight expression. You should have told me she was involved. Ryan looked exhausted. I did not know. Sophia's eyes moved to Emily, who stood beside Olivia and Daniel, speaking with calm authority to Patrick Hayes. That is the problem, Sophia said. You never know what matters until it is too late. Ryan did not answer. Across the room, Emily felt his stare, but she did not turn around. She had spent too many years looking back to see whether he would choose her, defend her, thank her, value her. Tonight, she had finally learned the freedom of not checking. Then Patrick approached her and said, Miss Carter, the board would like to formally review your acquisition proposal first thing tomorrow morning. Emily nodded. My office will be ready. Ryan heard every word. His shoulders lowered, not in humility yet, but under the weight of a truth he could no longer avoid. The woman he had called worthless was now the person his board trusted to salvage what remained. Emily walked toward the elevator with Olivia and Daniel beside her. The marble floor reflected the lights above, and for a moment, she saw her own reflection moving through the glittering lobby. Calm, pale, steady, no longer small. Behind her, Ryan finally said her name. Emily. She stopped, but she did not turn. The entire lobby seemed to quiet around them. Ryan took one step forward, his voice uneven for the first time that night. Did I ever matter to you? Or was I always just part of your plan? Emily turned then, slowly, and looked at the man who still did not understand. You mattered so much that I made myself smaller to help you grow, she said. My plan began the day I stopped doing that. The elevator doors opened. Emily stepped inside. Just before they closed, Ryan saw her face one last time, not angry, not broken, not waiting. And that was when fear finally reached him, because losing her love had been one thing, but losing the power to define her was something he had never imagined. The next morning, the glass conference room at Whitmore Group did not feel like the center of an empire. It felt like a place where people had finally stopped pretending the floor was solid. Ryan sat at the head of the table, but no one looked at him the way they had looked at him before. Patrick Hayes had arrived early with the emergency board packet. Karen Bell had already spoken to outside counsel. Two senior executives, who once repeated Ryan's confidence back to him, now kept their eyes on the numbers. The Carter and Vale offer sat in the center of the table, clean, structured, and impossible to ignore. Ryan tried to speak first. We are not selling our strongest division because my ex-wife wants to make a statement. Patrick's voice was tired but firm. This is not about your ex-wife. This is about liquidity, exposure, and whether we still have a path to protect shareholder value. Ryan hated the word protect. It made him sound like a risk instead of a leader. He looked towards Sophia, but she was not there. Her chair remained empty. An hour earlier, she had sent a message saying she needed space from the situation. Not from him. From the situation. Even in retreat, she had chosen careful wording. Margaret had called 6 times before breakfast, each message more desperate than the last. First she told Ryan to fix it. Then she told him to apologize. Then, in a voice strained by fear, she told him that Emily had always been more capable than he wanted to admit. That was the message he deleted without finishing. By noon, the board had voted to begin formal negotiations with Carter and Vale. Ryan remained chief executive officer in title, but every person in the room understood that his authority had been placed on a short leash. He walked out before the meeting ended, past the portraits of company milestones, past the framed magazine cover where he had once been called a visionary, past the reception desk where employees lowered their voices as he passed. For the first time, he wondered how many of them had known. How many had seen the cracks while he kept staring at the shine. That evening, he drove to Carter and Vale's office without calling ahead. The building was not flashy. It was 6 stories of warm brick and wide windows on a quiet street near the river, the kind of place Ryan would have once dismissed as too modest. But the lobby was full of motion. Employees moved with purpose. A receptionist greeted him politely without acting impressed. On the wall behind her, in brushed metal letters, were the words Carter and Vale Holdings. Seeing Emily's name there did something to him that the board meeting had not. It made her success physical, permanent, not a rumor, not a trick, a place, a system, a life that had grown without him. Emily agreed to see him for 10 minutes, not in her private office, but in a small meeting room with glass walls. Daniel Brooks remained nearby, visible through the hallway, close enough to remind Ryan that this was not a personal visit unless Emily allowed it to be. She entered wearing a cream blazer and carrying no folder this time. She did not need one. "You have 10 minutes, she said. Ryan stood too quickly. "Emily, I want to talk without lawyers, without investors, without everyone watching." She sat across from him. "Then talk." He looked at her, and all the lines he had prepared in the car suddenly sounded thin. He had planned to say the board was overreacting. He had planned to say the acquisition terms were aggressive. He had planned to say she owed him a private conversation before changing the course of his company. Instead, what came out was quieter. "I did not know how much you did." Emily held his gaze. "You did not want to know." The answer hurt because it was simple. Ryan sat down slowly. "I was proud. You were cruel when pride was not enough." He looked down at his hands. For once, there was no audience to reward his performance. No Sophia smiling at his side. No Margaret cleaning the edges of his ego. No investors waiting to be charmed. Just Emily, calm and unreachable in a way that made him feel like he was standing outside a locked door he had built himself. "I am sorry," he said. Emily's face did not change, but her silence changed the room. Ryan continued, more urgently. "I am sorry for the ballroom. For the divorce. For letting my mother speak to you that way. For taking credit. For making you feel like you had to disappear." Emily looked toward the window, where late afternoon light stretched across the floor. "I did disappear," she said. "But not because I was weak. Because I needed to become someone you could not interrupt." Ryan swallowed. "Can we start again?" The question hung between them, desperate and almost childish. Emily turned back to him. "No," he closed his eyes briefly, as if he had expected the answer but still needed to feel it arrive. "Not even someday?" "Ryan, you are not asking because you love who I am now. You are asking because the version of me you dismissed became useful to you again." He opened his mouth, then stopped. There was no defense that did not prove her point. Emily stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Carter and Vale will negotiate fairly. Your employees will be treated with respect. The parts of your company worth saving will be given a chance to survive." Ryan looked up at her. "And me?" For the first time that day, Emily's expression softened, but only slightly. "You will have to live without being rescued by the woman you refuse to see." She walked to the door, then paused. "That is not revenge. That is consequence." Ryan remained seated after she left, staring through the glass as employees passed by with files, coffee cups, and calm purpose. No one whispered. No one bowed. No one seemed afraid of the woman leading them. They respected her because she had built something that did not require making others feel small. And that was when Ryan finally understood the difference between the company he had claimed and the company Emily had created. His had been built around his image. Hers had been built around value. Outside, the city lights began to glow against the river. Emily walked back to her office, where Olivia was reviewing the transition plan, and Daniel was already marking the next contract. There was no celebration, no speech, no dramatic victory toast. Just work. Steady, clear, earned. Emily sat at her desk and looked for one moment at the old silver laptop on the shelf behind her, the one she had carried out of Ryan's house, when he thought she was leaving with nothing. Then she opened the acquisition file and signed the first internal approval. Not because Ryan begged. Not because Margaret panicked. Not because Sophia walked away. Because Emily Carter no longer made decisions from wounds. She made them from worth. 6 months later, the name Whitmore Group no longer appeared on the tallest banners at industry events. Its strongest division had been absorbed into Carter and Vale Holdings, and the employees who once feared layoffs now worked under clearer contracts, better systems, and leaders who listened before making promises. Ryan remained in business, but not at the center of the world he once believed belonged to him. He moved through smaller rooms now, quieter rooms, where people asked harder questions and applause came only after results. Sophia was gone before the first transition meeting ended. Margaret stopped calling Emily, though once, through a mutual acquaintance, Emily heard that Margaret had said, "She became more than we expected." Emily did not need the compliment. She had stopped collecting value from people who only respected power after they lost access to it. On a bright spring morning in downtown Chicago, Emily stood behind a podium at a women's leadership conference, looking out at hundreds of faces. Olivia sat in the front row. Daniel stood near the back with his arms folded, smiling like a proud older brother. Someone asked Emily what moment had changed her life. For a second, she thought of the ballroom, the laughter, Ryan's voice telling her she had no value. Then she thought of the small apartment, the old silver laptop, the first warehouse, the first employee, the first time someone called her boss and meant it. Emily leaned toward the microphone and said, "The moment that changed my life was not when someone rejected me. It was when I stopped asking that person to define what I was worth." The room rose in applause. Near the side exit, Ryan stood unseen by most, holding an invitation he had never used. He watched Emily smile, steady and free, and finally understood that she had not flipped her destiny to punish him. She had done it to belong to herself. Emily stepped away from the podium without looking back, and this time, the future opened for her alone.